Amina J, Mohammed always knew who she was. She had dedicated her entire life to building a solid career in the high-tech industry, a field known for its constant changes and harsh challenges. She was never the one to lead grand revolutions, but she was the one who quietly ensured that everything ran smoothly. As the marketing director at a rising tech startup, Amina had spent 13 years helping transform the company from an unknown name into a prominent symbol in the industry. She had the ability to lead her team and turn small ideas into groundbreaking marketing strategies. Each day, she woke up with a strong sense of confidence. Her company wasn't large, but it was sustainable. Her relationship with her staff was the most important thing to her. She knew every name in the meeting room, each person in the marketing department, the ones who had helped her build this small empire from scratch. That feeling, the feeling of connection, was what made Amina love her job and love the people she called colleagues. But then everything changed. One hot summer day, Amina received an unexpected call from the CEO, Alex Reed. She didn't think much of it, just felt the usual interest she always had in strategic meetings. However, when she entered Alex's office, she immediately sensed that there would be no warm welcome. Alex was sitting at his desk, the light from his desk lamp casting sharp, cold shadows on his face. "This is the final decision, Amina," Alex said without looking away from his computer screen. "We've decided to change our strategy, and the company needs a new face. You'll be replaced by another marketing director, someone with more experience in innovation and driving breakthroughs." Amina stopped breathing. It felt as though the world was spinning around her. 13 years of relentless effort were suddenly erased by a cold, emotionless sentence. She sat there in silence, unable to believe what she had just heard. Alex continued, "We know you've done well, Amina, but the company needs a bold change. You can leave starting next week. I'll make sure you're properly compensated, but there's no turning back." These words hit Amina like a slap to the face. It felt as though everything she had worked for had crumbled before her eyes. All her hard work, all the long nights spent dedicated to her career, suddenly seemed meaningless. She could only sit there, hands clenched tightly, trying not to show the emotions bubbling inside. She had believed she was an irreplaceable part of the company. Yet, in just a moment, everything had fallen apart. Alex didn't look at her when she stood up and quietly walked out of the room. The office door shut behind her, and the cold feeling of rejection enveloped her. It was as if the whole company had turned its back on her. None of her colleagues, who had once been so close to her, spoke up, and no one looked at her as she left the building. Amina didn't cry. There were no tears, despite what she had expected. Instead, she felt numb, as though she had been pushed to the bottom of a pit with no one to pull her out. She turned around, looked one last time at the building she had helped build, and then walked away. When she got home, Amina shut the door behind her and sat down on the couch in her silent apartment. Despair overwhelmed her, but deep inside, a terrifying coldness began to form. Trust had been broken, but that didn't mean she had nothing left. She had been betrayed, but she would not let that define her. That day, Amina looked into the mirror. She saw a strong woman looking back, but also a woman deeply wounded. She was no longer the Amina of before, the one full of passion and enthusiasm for her work. She had lost everything, but she wouldn't let it end like this. As the night fell, Amina sat in the quiet, silently planning something bigger, something that would not only reclaim her career, but defeat those who had abandoned her. Amina wasn't sure how long she had been sitting in that apartment, quietly staring out the window. With each passing day, the sense of disappointment and betrayal grew deeper inside her. but it wasn't the only feeling she harbored. The silence in the room welcomed a new resolve, an inevitable change. She realized she couldn't continue tormenting herself with memories of the past. She couldn't let this betrayal turn her into someone weak, someone who only knew how to hold on to resentment. Amina had decided to rise, but not in the way everyone expected her to. She started with small things, seemingly insignificant acts. Each morning, she woke up on time, prepared a simple breakfast, and went out for a walk. It wasn't to search for some inspiration, but to find peace in her soul again. But after every walk, when she looked at other tech companies, Amina felt a sharp pain. These companies, the very ones she had helped build, were now on the right track, growing strong thanks to the strategies she had once developed. She even saw posts on social media about the successful marketing campaigns of her former company, the one that no longer had a place for her. But that only fueled her determination. Amina began relearning everything she had neglected over the years, the latest marketing lessons, emerging technology trends, and leadership skills she had once dismissed as unnecessary. She didn't want to just return to her old job. She wanted to rebuild her career in a new, stronger, and more sustainable direction. Every evening, after finishing her personal tasks, she spent time researching startups and looking for partnership opportunities. She wasn't rushing, and she didn't speak to anyone about what she was doing. Everything happened quietly, alone, in the silence of the night. One day, as Amina sat in a small cafe, her eyes accidentally met a familiar face, a former colleague from the company. They had worked together for a long time, and she had helped him significantly with marketing campaigns before she left. He walked over, smiled, but as soon as he looked into her eyes, Amina sensed something was off. She felt his discomfort, his distance, the short questions, the brief pleasantries, all couldn't conceal the coldness he was showing. It seemed as though he no longer wanted any contact or connection with her. That feeling made Amina feel abandoned once again, forgotten, even though she had been the one to help him rise. But this time, Amina didn't let her emotions take control. She looked at him, nodded gently, and stood up. "Thank you, but I have to go," she said, not letting her disappointment show. Her steps were firmer, her gaze colder. She understood that no one would help her except herself. Old friends no longer cared, colleagues no longer reached out, and her former company no longer saw her value. All she needed now was patience and determination. She began attending marketing and startup workshops, not with the aim of finding a new job, but to rebuild herself. Amina knew that if she wanted to succeed, she had to take control of her life, not rely on anyone else. One afternoon, while attending a marketing seminar at an event center, she happened to meet a man named Ethan. He was an investor in the tech industry, and after a few exchanges, Amina sensed his interest. Ethan began asking her about the marketing strategies she had implemented in the past and what she had done for the company before she left. These questions weren't merely out of curiosity. Ethan seemed to be looking for a partner, someone who could help him expand a new project. Amina didn't let the opportunity slip. She gently shared her knowledge, but in her heart, she was resolved she would never work for anyone again. She would rebuild everything from the ground up. And one way to do that was to find partners in the fields she knew best, marketing and technology. Day by day, Amina quietly continued to research and build relationships with people who could help her start again. She learned from those who came before her, and she gradually found joy in sharing her knowledge with newcomers. Each step she took, no matter how small, left its mark on the journey she was on. But a major event was about to occur that would change everything. The call from Ethan came one morning. announcing that his project had received a significant investment and that he needed Amina's help. He didn't just want her to come on board as an advisor. He wanted her to head the marketing strategy for this project, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Amina said nothing, just smiled. She knew this was the turning point, the opportunity she had been waiting for. She was ready to begin again, to prove that her value was not measured by what had passed, but by what she could create in the future. The silence had been enough. Now was the time for her to step into the spotlight. Amina would never forget the moment she received the call from Ethan. It wasn't just a career opportunity. It was a sign of a new life, a fresh start after failure. Ethan hadn't only seen value in her old marketing strategies, but he also recognized Amina's ability to create bold innovations. He didn't hesitate to invite her to work on a large tech project where she could unleash her full potential without having to start over. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for, but things weren't going to be as easy as she thought. Amina soon realized that this so-called new opportunity was pulling her into an underground battle. As she began working, she noticed something strange. The marketing strategies Ethan's company wanted to implement weren't what Amina had envisioned. Though Ethan and his team were enthusiastic, their project management lacked the long-term sustainability she had built before. They pushed for short-term campaigns, overshadowing everything with flashy advertisements, but they didn't focus on building long-lasting trust with their customers. Amina couldn't just sit idly by. She knew that if they didn't change course quickly, the company would face a major failure. Ethan's decisions were pushing everything to the brink of crisis, but she also understood that if she didn't act at the right moment, she would lose this opportunity. One high-stakes situation followed another. Amina couldn't stand on the sidelines. She decided she had to do something. In a large meeting with the creative team, she gently proposed new ideas, but without directly addressing the issues she saw. She knew she had to be careful, because if she criticized them head-on, people would see her as stubborn and unwilling to adapt. However, Amina realized that when one of the company's strategies failed and revenue began to decline, it was Ethan who had to face the consequences first. He became increasingly agitated, anxious about the negative financial report the analysis team had presented. This didn't make Amina smile, but she saw an opportunity. She started to subtly pull the creative team together, gradually implementing unnoticed changes that began to improve the situation. Her strategies started to show results, even though no one immediately recognized it. Amina quietly documented every result, every number, and as the tension grew, she presented new solutions, slowly. Her solutions began to take effect, though no one noticed immediately. Step by step, the company's marketing campaigns started to improve. Revenue began to rise slightly, and stability began to return. However, no one noticed Amina's contribution. She remained just a quiet worker in the shadows, but her heart no longer felt the same pain as before. She knew that, even though no one spoke of it, the results were proof of her return at this moment. Amina realized that her silence would create the biggest change, and it was no longer about seeking revenge by fighting against those who had betrayed her. She had moved past that. She just needed to prove her value through actions, and the world would eventually see it. When the company began to show signs of stabilization, Amina received shocking news. One of her old friends from her previous company, someone she had helped a lot during their time working together, sent her a message. The message was short, but it surprised Amina. He told her that the old company was facing major problems. Their marketing strategies had begun to crumble, and the company's leadership team was struggling to find a solution. They were trying to cut costs, but nothing they implemented was working. Everything was falling apart. Amina couldn't help but feel something strange in her chest. She wasn't happy about the company's failure, but in a brief moment, she understood something. The people who had betrayed her, who had pushed her out of the company, were now facing the problems she had once warned them about. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, what she had done at her old company. The help she had provided was now the reason that company couldn't sustain itself. Amina said nothing, just sighed. She wasn't someone filled with hatred, but deep inside, there was an indescribable sense of satisfaction. What she had done, the strategies she had applied, were now bringing her closer to the success she had always dreamed of, and it was the mistakes of others that were making her shine. When Ethan's company received positive feedback from customers, Amina knew she had completed her mission, but she wasn't the only one who saw the results. Those who had once looked down on her, the ones who had pushed her out of the company, were slowly realizing that they had made a big mistake. But at that point, Amina didn't need to say anything. She had proven her worth with results, and that was the only thing that mattered. Amina felt the change gradually unfolding within her as her strategies began to take effect, and the company's revenue grew little by little. She realized that she wasn't just rebuilding her career, she was also reinventing herself. The time for silence had been enough. It was now time for her to step into the spotlight, not to prove anything, but to assert that she had come back stronger than ever before, but not through fierce confrontations or angry declarations. She didn't need to do that. She knew how to prove her worth through results. The messages from Ethan became fewer, and Amina sensed that everything was slowly falling into place. But that wasn't all. There was still something that kept her from feeling completely at peace. A part of her always felt that, despite her success. She couldn't fully close the chapter of her past, the betrayal, the way she had been cast aside from her old company, still echoed somewhere deep inside, like a wound that hadn't completely healed. One morning, as Amina sat in her small office, she suddenly received an unexpected call. She recognized the number right away. It was from her old company. She had anticipated this moment, but she never expected it to come so soon, especially when she was on the path to rebuilding everything. She answered the call. "Hello, Amina. It's Alex. I hope you're doing well." Alex's voice sounded strange, as if he was trying to appear friendly but couldn't hide his discomfort. Amina knew that if it weren't for an urgent situation, he wouldn't have contacted her. She sighed and responded, "Hello, Alex, what's going on?" "Well, I wanted to apologize for everything that happened before. The company is facing some major issues, and we need someone with your experience to help us fix things. Everything is spiraling out of control, and we can't solve it on our own." He paused for a moment, as if unsure whether Amina would forgive him or accept the help. "I know I treated you badly before, but right now, things are too serious. We need you to come back. Can you help us?" Amina didn't answer immediately. She sat silently, feeling a growing tightness in her chest. She had thought about the possibility of this moment, but never expected it to come so soon. She had walked away and rebuilt herself, found a new path. But now, those who had once abandoned her were asking her to return. This not only tested her pride, but also created a conflict in her mind. Should she help them? Could returning help her regain some of what she had lost? Amina looked out the window, took a deep breath. She couldn't go back to the old ways, to the people who hadn't trusted her, but she also couldn't let that company fall into the hands of people who didn't understand the core value of what she had built. She knew that if she didn't act, everything she had done would become meaningless, and this was her last opportunity to prove that she could stand strong, not for others, but for herself. She turned back to her computer. opened an old document. The report she had prepared before leaving the company, the strategies, the long-term plans she had set were still there, silently serving as evidence that she was the one who had helped the company stay afloat. Amina realized that this was a major turning point, an opportunity for her to rise again. She didn't have to go back the old way, but in a completely new manner. She wouldn't just be someone fixing mistakes. She would be the one to reinvent the company, bringing fresh and innovative strategies that only she could implement. Finally, she answered the phone. "All right, I'll come back, but I'll do everything my way. If you're willing to accept that, I'll help you. But I won't work the old way anymore. Get ready for a revolution." She emphasized the word revolution clearly, marking it as a sign of the major changes she would bring. When the call ended, Amina felt ready. She wasn't returning out of hatred, nor out of anger. She was returning because she understood that no one could determine her value but herself. This was the moment to prove that the changes she brought would not only be for her old company, but would mark a major turning point in her life. Not because of what had happened in the past, but because of what she would create in the future. She stood up, looked in the mirror, and smiled gently. This time, Amina wasn't just returning to work. She was returning to take control of everything, and more importantly, to prove that no one could erase her worth, no matter how the world turned its back on her. She would stand firm because she had learned how to start over. Amina was ready, despite not having a direct confrontation, no angry retorts or emotional outbursts. When she walked into her old company, she didn't feel like she was returning for revenge. She had left behind the pain, the betrayal, and the negative emotions. What she was seeking now was affirmation, the affirmation that she could overcome everything, not through anger, but through her own abilities. Her return wasn't to prove who was right or wrong, but to prove that her value could not be erased, no matter the circumstances. When she entered the first meeting after her return, no one dared to speak. They were all still there, her old colleagues, but now they looked at her as though she were someone completely new. Amina didn't need to explain herself. She sat down, gently opened her laptop, and began presenting the new marketing plan, a long-term strategy she had prepared in advance. The numbers, the charts, the detailed plans, everything was ready. No room for shortcuts or delays. With the new ideas she presented, it seemed that no one could argue against them. The strategies she had developed were not only feasible, but also aligned with current market trends. Even though everyone in the room felt unfamiliar with her approach, they couldn't deny that what she brought had value. She didn't speak much, no flowery language. Everything was conveyed through clear results, through the concrete data she had prepared. Amina's approach was a living proof that, sometimes, proving oneself doesn't require noise or spectacle. It just requires doing it right, doing it well, and being patient each day. Amina focused on her work, step by step, rebuilding what had been lost. She didn't return to push anyone down, nor to prove who was wrong, but those who had once been her colleagues now couldn't deny the change she had brought. Her old company gradually realized that nothing could grow sustainably without the careful, long-term planning Amina had always maintained. Their short-term marketing strategies, the flashy ad campaigns they had once been proud of, were no longer effective. Customers began to leave. Public trust slowly faded. Amina did nothing. She quietly watched as everything gradually changed. It seemed like everything was collapsing, as the very mistakes of those who had betrayed her were now coming back to haunt them. The lack of sustainability in their methods, the lack of caution and planning, had led to an inevitable crisis. Meanwhile, Amina remained steadfast with her strategies, never changing or stepping back. Her success wasn't a victory in a battle, but the durability of long-term effort. 1 month after her return, the company's situation became more tense than ever. The wrong decisions made by the former CEO, Alex, had led to a chain of irreversible events. Investors began pulling out. Major contracts were canceled, and the company faced a severe financial crisis. Alex, who had once dismissed Amina, now had no ability to salvage the situation. He couldn't solve the problems Amina had seen long ago. At the same time, Amina received a call from Ethan. He informed her that her old company had gone bankrupt, and they were trying to sell off valuable assets. For a brief moment, Amina didn't feel satisfaction or glee. She didn't feel victorious. The only emotion she felt was calmness. What she had done was simply follow the right path, not harming anyone, just creating positive change for herself and Ethan's company. She couldn't rejoice in the downfall of others, but she understood that sometimes the failure of an organization is the result of not respecting true values. Amina didn't confront those who had abandoned her. She didn't need to. She had proven that her value didn't just come from the successes she had created for herself, but from what she had helped build, from what she had contributed throughout this journey. Amina had not only transformed herself, but had also helped Ethan's new company become a formidable competitor in the industry. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to fight. She proved her worth through each step, through the final results, looking back on everything she had been through. Amina realized she was no longer the person she had been in those past years. She no longer felt betrayed, no longer carried the anger or resentment. What she needed now was understanding and peace of mind. She had learned that, sometimes, not everyone will understand your value from the start. But what mattered was believing in yourself, doing what's right, and persistently pursuing the path you've chosen. She knew that, even if others abandoned you, no one could take away your true value unless you allowed them to.